Hello, welcome to the self-learning platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today we start Unit 11, Jawaharlal Nehru. And our topic is political ideas of Nehru. And we are discussing Nehru on nationalism. Nehru was a great nationalist, though he had no theory of nationalism. He did believe in the objectivity of the fundamental unity of India, nurtured on cultural foundations, which was, according to him, not religious in the narrow sense of the term. He did accept the narrow diversities, but at the same time, he admired the unity running throughout the Indian history. He was indeed inspired by the concept of cultural polarity and synthesis. To him, nationalism was a noble phase of self magnification. He writes nationalism is essentially a group memory of past achievements, traditions, and experiences, and nationalism is stronger today than it was ever been. Wherever a crisis has arisen, nationalism has emerged again and dominated the scene, and people have sought comfort and strength in their old traditions. One of the remarkable developments of the present age has been the rediscovery of the past and or the nation, but nationalism has also solid social, political, and economic foundations. By nature, Nehru was a nationalist and was a rebel against authoritarianism. He did not like the politics of talks, of too much submission and appeal to authorities, and that was why he always found himself akin to Bal Gangadhar Tilak. He says, so far as political matters were concerned, I was, if I may say so, an Indian nationalist, desiring India's freedom and rather inclined in the context of Indian politics to the more extreme wing of it, as represented then by Mr. Tilak. But he was in the way in agreement with Tilak's deep religious motivations. Nehru's nationalism had its clear distinctive features. It was a composite and a living force, and as such could make the strongest appeal to the spirit of man. Only such a type of socialism could be a driving force for freedom, and it alone could give a certain degree of unity, vigor, and vitality to many people all over the world. But Nehru did not appreciate the narrow and financial type of nationalism. R.C. Pillai writes about Nehru's view on narrow nationalism. Nationalism would be harmful if it ever made the people conscious of their own superiority. It would be more undesirable if the spirit of nationalism pushed up any people forward towards aggressive expansionism. Nehru himself says of the Indian nationalism as liberal and tolerant. Nationalism is essentially an anti feeling, and it feeds and fattens on hatred and anger against other national groups. Translated into action, Nehru's nationalism was patriotism and independence of the country. In fact, Nehru's nationalism was a firm commitment to the idea of complete independence of the country. In his sharply worded rejoinder to all those who still advocated dominion states, Nehru most empathetically stated way back in 1928, if India has a message to give to the world, it is clear that she can do so more efficiently, effectively as an independent country than as a member of British group. And in 1928 he presided over the Lahore Congress session and got the Purna Swaraj resolution passed. Now we discuss Nehru on democracy. Nehru was a great champion of democracy. Throughout his life, he laid emphasis on the importance of democracy and desired passionately that independent India would go along the full democratic process. He had a great passion for freedom. Grown in the Western democratic traditions, Nehru absorbed since childhood many of the dominant concepts of modern democratic thought. He had read extensively philosophers such as Rousseau, Montesquieu, Mill, and made reference of their works in the writings. He conferred and wrote in his an autobiography. My roots are still perhaps partly in the 19th century, and I have been too much influenced by the humanist liberal tradition to get out of it completely. For Nehru, democracy was an intellectual condition. It was primarily a way of life based on the hypothesis that the freedom was integral to the being of man. He was also aware that freedom required a set of conditions. He writes self discipline, tolerance, and a taste of peace. These were the basic conditions for living a life of freedom. He did not subscribe to the view that unrestrained freedom made any sense. He held Amen Jha says that the state was born to make a reality of the freedom of its citizens, for it served to counteract the evil influences of the lower instincts of the individual man in the social process. The state Nehru held was a spiritual necessity for men to clear the patriarchalistic convictions that the religion promote. Nehru was a true democrat, for he never doubted the soundness of democracy as a spiritual proposition. In his view, the spiritualization of a social process was synonymous with the maximization of democracy within it, and the later called for the objectivization of not merely the guarantees of rights but also of rights themselves. Nehru's concept of democracy had specific implications. In the early years of liberation struggle, democracy for Nehru meant the ideal of self rule or responsible government. Later was the socialist ideas altering his worldview. He came to see democracy as one that emphasized an equality of opportunity to all in the economic and political field, and freedom for the individual to grow and develop to the best of his personality. Here we want to wind up this lecture. Thank you so much for your attention.